Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the Board of Water Resources briefing meeting. I was told last time when I started the meeting I didn't use the gavel, and so I'll use the gavel to officially start the meeting today. My name is Kyle Stevens, and I'm the chairman of the board this year. Would just like to again extend a welcome to those that are here in attendance, board members, staff, and guests. Would just like to mention that we apologize for the confusion if you're thinking that this is the board meeting that was starting at 1 o'clock, because the information on the water users agenda indicated that the Board of Water Resources would be meeting from 1 to 3. But in actuality, and meeting the requirements, the public meeting notice website and such, this is the Board of Water Resources briefing meeting where we will be discussing the agenda, and then the official board meeting starts, as was noted and posted on the website, starts at 3 p.m. But if you're here and because of that confusion, if there are any of the items that we come up and discuss on the agenda, we will welcome you to make public comments on that at this time if it's not convenient for you to stay beyond this meeting and when the official board meeting starts at 3 o'clock. But we'd just like to officially recognize members of the board that are present. Seated to my left is Blaine Ibsen, followed by Norm Johnson, followed by Randy Crozier, Charles Holmgren, Wayne Anderson. Seated to my immediate left is Jim Lemon. And again, my name is Kyle Stevens. Juliette Tennert, the other member of our board, will be joining us remotely, and she will probably be joining us sometime in progress of this meeting commencing. So with that brief introduction, again, welcome. I'll let Candace go ahead and introduce those of water resource staff that are here and go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to welcome our great water resources team here as well. Joel Williams, Todd Stonley, Eric Dixon, Tom Cox, Shalane DiBernardi, Michael Sanchez, Stephen Gregerson, Randy Staker. We also have our AG's office, Wendy Crother and Marty Bushman. Thanks for being here. And then online we have David Gunther, Aaron Austin, and Shannon Clow. And Shannon's taking our minutes today, so really grateful for her. In addition, I gotta say thank you to Mike and Phil for all their work as they set up all the AV and make this all happen. So appreciate that. And if I might have missed a couple online, but let me know if I missed anybody. And
I'll go ahead and read in for the record those that are have joined us and are visiting today. Ryan York with Provo City Water. Gary Calder with Provo City Corporation. Dennis Weir, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Provo Metro Water District. Keith DeNoss with Provo River Water Users Association. Dion Stockert with, help me with the acronym there. AE2S? Okay, thank you. And Stephen Jones, Hanson, Allen, and Luce. Again, thank you for being here. I'll just mention it now, and also perhaps again in our board meeting at 3 o'clock, but some of you may have received copies of this pamphlet and booklets that has been put together. The Division of Water Resources is celebrating its, and the Board of Water Resources, its 75th anniversary this year. And so it's a privilege for me to be able to serve as chairman of the board for this year. It's also interesting, as we've had opportunity to be involved in the Water Users Conference this week, or for the past couple of days, and learn of all of the issues surrounding water. I grew up in Summit County. I currently live in Davis County, and I've often thought, as I've had opportunity to be involved in water issues for a number of years, I've often thought and appreciated the work of our ancestors. As I mentioned, I live in Davis County, grew up in Summit County. In Summit County, there are the Echo Reservoir, East Canyon Reservoir, Morgan County Lost Creek Reservoir, back to Summit County Rockport Reservoir, Smith and Morehouse, and then in Weber County you have Pineview, Causey, Willard, and I shudder to think what the population would be like if it had not been for the foresight of those individuals who developed those water resources those many years ago, that we as a population have an opportunity to enjoy at this time. And so as we celebrate the 75th anniversary and all of the accomplishments that have taken place in the past 75 years, we look to the next 75 years and wonder what those opportunities will be like, and the water resources and how they'll be developed, and how they'll be conserved for future generations. So with that, just like to add that as some comments. So with that, we'll go ahead and discuss the board agenda that we will be covering at the 3 o'clock board meeting. So first of all, are there any issues with the minutes that we need to address? Again, recognizing that we will not take any votes on those, but if there are some changes or corrections that we need to make note of at this time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Holmgren.
just a couple of minor corrections. In the briefing meeting, I was not listed as being virtual. I was not here in person, and so that might be noted. And then in the general meeting minutes, Wayne Anderson became part of my family again and was listed as Wayne Holmgren instead of Wayne Anderson on first page there, I believe it is.
So was that a promotion or a demotion?
Well,
or how do you determine
I
it?
appreciate the fact that he takes in strays.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. So when you're up in that north country, the door's always open, is that what
Yeah,
Sid said?
yeah, it was on page 1 under the Midway irrigation subject, committal of funds, and
Oh, so not under the list of those present?
no,
Because it
no,
was corrected
no,
there,
no,
so.
under the RE 438 Midway irrigation, Wayne Holmgren moved to commit project funds, and Norm Johnson seconded the motion that I believe should be Wayne Anderson.
Okay,
Just those two minor things. It's pretty inconsequential, but
are there others? I think, Jim, you had,
I noticed that I was at the board meeting, but I was left off the list of who was there. It's on 3I. In case somebody wonders how I was there without showing up.
okay. Okay, there it is. Okay, well, so we'll make note of those corrections. Were there any others that we needed to bring up at this point? Okay. Then we will go to the next item. We'll have a snow report. I don't know that it will be any different than what was already presented yesterday morning. Not aware that there have been any weather events or changes, but nonetheless, Jordan Clayton will be here and will give us an updated version of the NRCS snow report. So let's go ahead and discuss the project items for the agenda then. And the first one is RE 441, Provo City reauthorization. And Wayne, that is in your area, so anything you'd like to add or give at this point? And then we'll have Tom.
I think it's probably pretty self-explanatory what's happening and what they want to accomplish, but I'm gonna turn some time to Tom, let him fill in any details that he might have.
There we go. Provo City came before the board in October of 2020 for a project for an aquifer storage and recovery project. It's about a $20 million project that would take water from the Provo River through a raw water pipeline up to Rock Canyon and distribute it up there so it could infiltrate into the aquifer and recharge the aquifers that the city wells draw from. Since then, the city's kind of reconsidered about what they want to do at this time. They have a number of Provo River water rights that they aren't able to use because it is raw water. They don't have a treatment facility. They don't have a separate secondary irrigation system. So they're kind of underused. So they were looking at opportunities to use that. So ASR was one idea. And then constructing their own water treatment plant was the other plan. So they'll be before you today for an enlarged project that will include the ASR portion and a 20 million gallon day water treatment plant. So the project will be broken up into two phases. Most of the ASR work will be done in phase 1, and then the water treatment plant and some pipeline will be done in phase 2, which will be start in 2023 and take a couple of years to construct. So if you look at the cost estimate has jumped up to $96 million. And right now, it's proposed that the board provide up to $36.75 million for the total project. That'll be matched by Division of Drinking Water. They have a Water Smart grant in hand, and they have applied for additional federal grants. That $12 million figure is just kind of an estimate. They won't know until later in the year how much grant they'll get. And so what they'll be asking from the board today is just reauthorization of the project with the enlarged amount. In the cost sharing chart, I did list a cost share of what we think the phase 1 will be, because it's anticipated that the city will be ready to proceed with most of that work by June. So we're shooting for the June meeting for committal of funds for that phase 1 of the project. And if you look on there, it's mainly water resources, the Water Smart grant, and a local contribution. So those final amounts and cost share and repayment will be taken care of when funds are committed. And then next year or sometime later, we'll come back for committal of funds for phase 2. And I can almost guarantee those cost share numbers that are before you today will be different at that point. So we'll just address it at that time. So the board will be authorizing the total amount up to the 38.3% of the cost share, and with the given repayment amount that's before you today, 1% interest over 30 years. So that's the changes in a nutshell. Do you have any questions about any of that?
Are there any questions of the board members?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a couple
Go
of
ahead.
questions. Okay, Tom, what happens, what's the contingency plan with that $12 million in grants with the ARPA and the BRIC money? What if that does not go through? What's the contingency? How does that impact the request for today with funding from here?
If they don't get the 12 million in grant, they'll either ask Water Resources, drinking water, or a combination of the both to help make up that amount.
Okay. Okay, next question was, it's going to be in 2 phases. So what they're asking for authorization for today, is it phase 1 only? I got a little turned around reading this and listening to you. Is it both phases or just phase 1? You said they'd come back and readjust numbers, and you could guarantee it will be different numbers, but are we talking today just phase 1, or is it phase 1 and phase 2 kind of, or what are we talking?
Today, we're talking about the entire project, so phase 1 and phase 2, just for reauthorization.
Okay.
And then in June, they'll be back for committal of funds for just phase 1. And then in a year or so, I probably come back to cover phase 2.
Okay, my third question is, where they've got Provo River water rights right now that they have not historically been able to use, and they want to use that for the aquifer recharge type thing, what have they been doing with the water that they haven't been used? Has it been being leased to others for use, or what's been happening with that unused Provo River water rights?
Do Provo River folks have? Okay, Gary, that's Gary Calder from Provo City.
Yes, I'm Gary Calder with Provo City Water Resources, the division director. So that water that you see there, those were water rights. We have been utilizing some of that water and running it through the Central Utah Water Plant. So that water has been being used. We also have an exchange where we're taking some of that water up to South Fork and exchanging it through that process as well. So those water rights have been used, but we're just kind of shifting things around with this new plant.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Blaine. Are there any other questions from the board? I had some of the same similar questions, but I appreciate you asking those and getting clarification on that. So, Wayne, this is in your area. You're prepared to?
No, I'll make a motion.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Would also just like to mention at this point, recognize another one of our guests, Leland Stenquist, President of the Hates Creek Irrigation Board. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Okay. The next item on our agenda then is RE 456, Kanab Irrigation Company. This is authorization and committal of funds, Garfield County. Jim, that is in your area?
Okay. That's Kane County.
Oh, excuse me. What did I say?
Close enough. It's a neighbor.
Oh, well, I was reading off the agenda, which said Garfield, so. Duly noted.
I'll turn most of the time to Tom, but just mention a couple of things. This project has to do out by Jackson Reservoir. Tom and I went out there and met with the Kane County Water Conservancy District and the Kanab Irrigation Company, and went through. Went through what needed to be done. What the situation is they've got a well there already, but it's gone down, and this supplies about 200 homes as well as about 800 acres of farm ground. And so they need it up and water going, and they've actually started on part of it because it's got to be going for this spring. It's because it's replacing what's already there. We haven't got any easement problems or any purchase things or anything that way to have to go through. So I think it's pretty straightforward, and I'll let Tom tell you what all he wants to.
Okay. So the Kanab Irrigation Company gets their water from two sources, direct diversions from Kanab Creek, and then, as Jim mentioned, they drilled a well in about 2003, that time period. That well, they've noticed that the casing is rusting through, and they've had problems. When they first drilled it, it was producing about 600 gallons per minute, and it dropped way down, so they replaced the bowls in the well. That brought the production up for a while, but then it dropped off again. They replaced the motor on the pump, but they're in fear that that well will fail, and that's a integral part of their water supply now. And so they're in a hurry to get that replaced, so they're coming before the board for funds to do that. So they'll be before the board today for authorization and committal of funds. It's a $300,000 project. So the board, if you agree, will authorize and commit 85% of the project cost up to $255,000 for that work. And since it's such a small amount, it'll be coming from the revolving construction fund at 0% interest, giving them 15 years to pay it back with payments of about $17,000. The district has agreed to make those payments, so we'll be asking the irrigation company and the district to come up with a service agreement between the two organizations just to make sure everything's laid out as far as well ownership and operation and cost and everything like that. So, are there any questions from the board on that one?
The board, go ahead, Mr. Ibsen.
I have a couple of questions on this one also that came to mind. And the last one you just touched on a little bit, Tom, but I was curious about the arrangements of, where we say in here that the district has agreed to make payments on. Will we be contracting with the irrigation company or with the district? And you said that there need to be a service agreement, but how does all that work? I just had questions in my mind.
So we are contracting with the irrigation company. They are the owner of the water rights, which we hold title to from other projects. So we'll be contracting with the irrigation company. And since our money is going to the irrigation company, that's why we need a service agreement to make sure all of the financial situation is covered between the two organizations.
Okay, so we will be covered that way then. Mm-hmm. And then my other question just dealt with, I guess if the district is going to make the payments on it, that it kind of answers my question, but they have two other contracts with us right now. One will finish up in 2 years, in 2024, and one in 2026. Their ability to pay was my question, but if the district's going to make the payments, I guess that kind of
Right.
answers that.
And the payments on those two others are in the $8,000 range each, so
Okay.
we won't be, even if the irrigation company was paying for the project, they wouldn't be paying more than they were before. They'd have a couple lean years. but-
They're not talking to combining this one with those, though? They're
No.
gonna- Okay. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just follow up on Blaine's questions. I noticed that there's quite a bit for homeowners, but it still qualifies as an irrigation project, the percentage interest.
Yes, because of the size of the project, they're only asking for $255,000, so it would fall underneath the revolving fund. I went ahead and looked at the affordability and the ag benefit. The ag benefit, there really isn't any because they're just replacing an existing facility. So there's no additional income coming in. On the M&I side, they already pay more for water than the board's affordability guideline says they should be. So they would be entitled to a lower interest rate anyway, so. In both ways, they're eligible for a low interest rate and actually even a longer payback period, but because the district's paying it back, then they agreed to pay it back in 15 years just to get through with it.
Mr. Chairman, another question for Tom or Jim. seems like they have a pretty good sized flow for the number of acres they have, at least compared to my experience with irrigation. 26.7 CFS for that many acres. Can they physically deliver that kind of flow to that acreage efficiently, I guess I should say?
Yeah, they can do it efficiently. The board helps fund a pressurized irrigation system in 1983 that's been paid off. So through this system, it's very efficient. The question is the amount of water that's available. They may have a water right for that amount, but they may not actually get that amount of water. That's part of the reason they built the Jackson Flat Reservoir. So when they do get additional water, they can store it in there and pump it back into the system if there's an actual physical water shortage. Does that answer your question there, Charles?
Yes, Tom, thank you.
One other quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
This well has deteriorated fairly quickly. It looks like they've done a lot of remedial work on it. What's going to prevent the new well from having the same issues? Is it a water quality issue, chemistry issue, or what's the deal with the well?
It's partly a chemistry issue. The original well had a steel casing. They're talking about using plastic or stainless steel in the new well, so it will be a different situation, so it won't deteriorate that quickly.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, maybe just one more comment. I think actually with all of their water that they have, it irrigates around 1,300 acres, doesn't it?
I think their water right covers that amount, closer to the 1,300 because of the area. They have a higher duty than just the 3 acre-feet per acre. So that's part of the issue there too. They have 4 or 5 acre-foot per acre.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? If not, Jim, this is in your area. Are you prepared to
Yes.
take a motion? Okay. All right, thank you, Tom, and thank you for those questions. And so we'll go to the next item on our agenda, and that is an update to the secondary meter funding rules. So, Joel, we'll turn the time to you. Looks like you and Marty are on tap.
Yes, that is correct. As we looked at the Senate Bill 240, House Bill 242 regarding secondary metering that passed, we read through it to try to determine, are there sections in here that will require additional rulemaking by the division? And one of the ones that stood out was regarding the educational component. That is one of the requirements that an applicant would have to do, essentially saying that when they send out either their monthly bill or an online statement that they might send, that it has to have an educational component. And it says as established by rule. And so
Can you reference, call to our attention the reference and where you're
Yes.
speaking at in the bill itself?
Yes, so let's see. I'm just flipping through it myself to find the line. 329, line 329. It's on page 13 of your board book.
Can you all find that?
So
Okay,
the way
go
this is in the section that's listing what the sponsor, the project applicant, I should say, is agreeing to do. And so on 328, it says an agreement to, and then A, provide an educational component for end users as determined by the division by rule, either on a monthly statement or by a customer-specific internet portal that provides information on the customer's usage more frequently than monthly, or bill according to usage using a tiered conservation rate and provide an educational component. So either A or B, either way, they're going to be required to have an educational component, whether they bill according to the usage or whether they're just sending a monthly statement or an internet portal that is more frequently than monthly. So either way, they need an educational component, and then it says, as determined by the division by rule. So Marty and a few of us on staff decided, well, we probably ought to clarify in our rules then, what is this educational component? And so what you have before you in your board book, and that was right before the bill, is that page that says financial arrangements at the top. And it'd be right after the last project that was presented. After the Kanab irrigation map is that next page that is financial arrangements. That is a copy of the existing rule with the proposed change at the bottom, which would start with the letter H, about middle of the page. The applicant will be required to include an educational component described in subsection 2 on, and then we go through and tried to clarify a little bit what we would be looking for. So each secondary water user's monthly water use statement or customer specific internet portal that provides information on their usage more frequently than monthly, or the secondary water user's monthly use statement or internet portal and bill according to usage on a tiered conservation rate. So we tried to encompass the possibilities that were laid out in the bill, where they could do it through a monthly statement, they could do it through an internet portal, or they could bill according to the usage. But all three of those would require also an educational component. So then we get to what is the educational component. That's the II, about 3/4 of the way down the page. The educational component required in the monthly water use statement or customer specific internet portal, A, must promote water conservation and provide information on the customer's secondary water usage. So that's one of the requirements we wanted to make sure is they're letting the user know how much water are they using. So that would be in their statement or on the online portal. B, may include water use comparisons with previous months, comparisons with other customers' water use on similar sized lots, recommended water use for lot size, comparisons between actual use and recommended use, suggestions for reducing secondary water use, etc. So we wanted to include some suggestions because there's going to be small systems with very few connections, and they're probably going to have a little bit more of a streamlined approach. And then you've got more developed areas, and we have some examples already, some systems that already have a very good informational monthly statement that goes out that shows what your water use is compared to the same month last year, or compared to another water user of a similar lot size. Or one that we find really useful is when they say, based on your lot size and your irrigated acreage, you should be using this much, but you're using this much. And it kind of gives you a feel for if you are overusing what your lawn would actually need. So those, we wanted to have those be suggestions and not requirements. And then the last is the III, the educational component and tiered billing provisions apply to secondary water metering grants and loans issued under sections. And we included section 34, which is the one that the secondary metering rules are currently under, but then also adding 34.5, which will be the new section for the secondary metering bill that is now statute, the House Bill 242. That one will be numbered 34.5. So that's, as we looked over that bill, this was one of the sections that we felt most immediately needed addressing in rule so that we can proceed with these grants. And so we wanted to get that one before you. As we looked at the bill as well, there will be some other items in there that we think will need some additional rules. There's the section that talks about $2 million for people that have already installed meters, and that they could apply for that for use for a conservation purpose is what it says. And so we're seeking some clarification from the bill sponsor on that, and then we will plan to draft rules about how we may want to consider handling those grants, the $2 million grants for those that have already installed meters. But we thought we could hold off on that and not have that hold up the rest of this $250 million going towards secondary meters. So we thought, let's get this in rule, get going with these grants, and then we'll figure out what to do about those that have already installed meters, and we're seeking a grant.
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused on just that last part that you covered then. So someone who's come in and requested funding in the past,
So the $2 million is, maybe I should show you the line. It's at the very end of the bill. So this will be on the last page, page 14 of the board book, and we're going to look at line 354. Notwithstanding the other provisions of this section, the board may issue a grant to a secondary water supplier, A, that installed meters on secondary water connections before May 4th of this year, B, that has not otherwise received a grant under this section, C, for the purpose of water conservation, D, in an amount not to exceed $2 million. So we've read this several times and had several minds on it. The way we are interpreting that is for someone, so it's pretty clear, they already have to have installed meters, and they can't have,
they
they
cannot
can't be
have
seeking
already
a
received a
grant.
grant.
So they can't go for the other grant amount.
Okay,
It would be them saying, hey, we've already done meters, we're not gonna ask for any more money for meters, but we would like to ask for $2 million. For meters we've already installed, the line that we're debating on is that line 358, for the purpose of water conservation. As we understand it, the bill sponsor intended that to mean for another water conservation project that they intend to do. And so we're seeking clarification, because we would need to then establish rules. Well, what kinds of projects could they use these funds for, and how are we going to administer that? And so I don't think it's as simple as them saying, hey, we've already done a bunch of meters, reimburse us $2 million. They would have to have another conservation project that they intend to put that $2 million towards.
yeah, and
as
so
we
the
understand
question I have there, it says on meters, connections before May 4th, 2022, how far back, you know?
Yeah, there's no
can
limit
that
in,
go? I
no
mean,
limit
can
in the
they-
bill.
If they did something 10 years ago, can they now come and request, you know, reimbursement?
I think they can, and
Can or can't?
I think they can, if you don't mind, Joel.
Please.
I'll just mention that Marisa actually had a conversation with Tim Hawks. Hawks? Is that-
Representative Hawks.
Yes, last week, and asked about this because, well, he wasn't technically a sponsor, he was involved with the bill. And as she told me what he conveyed, I said, oh, well, it probably makes sense. I'm pretty sure ARPA funds are specifically for projects. And so when she asked about clarification on this, it's essentially saying, okay, you guys all got your meters installed before it was required by law. Good job. Come up with some other water conservation project, and we'll let the board give you $2 million to help pay for it. So it can't just be straight reimbursement for the money that they already put out. But if they've got a project, another project to conserve water in the works, and I had a conversation with someone yesterday who asked me about this. He said, now what about this $2 million grant? Because we've already done our meters. They're already installed. And I said, well, the way we understand it, we're still working on it. I said, we're really trying to get the secondary meter grants going and out the door. I said, but our understanding is that if you have another project, then you can apply for the grant money to go towards that project. And he said, so if I have a $6 million project, $2 million in WaterSmart, I can come try to get another $2 million from you? And I said, that's our understanding. So it can't just be, well, we're going to reimburse you because you did a good thing. I think ARPA funds are specifically for projects. And so that's probably what we're working within.
So they'll get a $2 million credit towards a future conservation project that they're interested in working on.
Well, I
Because they
think
have
it's-
already been proactive.
I think it's
in-
going to have to be something they're doing pretty soon, because like the other ARPA money, it's only good for, we
Right.
got to have it contracted by 2024 and spent
spent
by 2026.
Okay. Okay, other questions on that? Blaine?
What action are you requesting from us, Joel, if anything, today?
So the action we request today would be to approve these drafted rules, and it would be that page that we just read over, that talked about the educational component. So that's the one change that we are hoping to have approved so that we can start that rulemaking process.
But I've got one other question
Go ahead.
too, and it's something we haven't discussed, but I got asked questions by 2 or 3 of the small rural folks I know, and it deals with, you know, the applicability of this rule, and of course on page 3 of our handout, secondary water supply means and small secondary water retail supplier means. Who is this funding going to be available to? Was the ones that were talking to me were the small secondary ones, you know, less than the 5,000 connections. Could you just walk us through just a little bit the applicability of this rule? Who really has to do it? Who's going to be eligible? Who doesn't have to do it? If they don't have to do it, the small ones, can they still plug into the funds?
Great question, Blaine. And it can be a little confusing if you read the bill front to back, because the portions that aren't underlined, I mean, that was already existing law, and now the portions that are underlined are new proposed changes. And so there were sections of the bill that already had the definitions for a small retail supplier, and that the boards, for example, in line 119, the board may make up to 10 million available in low interest rate loans. You know, that goes back to 2019. So we've already had that in place for 3 years now. So some of those sections are referring to other things that are already existing, you know, and we already knew that the board had ability to do loans for secondary meters. As far as this new funding, the 250 million is available to any secondary water provider, small or large, in any county. Randy?
Well, the way I read it, it does limit it to 5 million for 7,000 for under users or over 7,000. Oh, sorry. Anyway, on line 281 through 284, I think explains that pretty good. For 7,000 connections or less, it's a 5 million max. And for 7,000 and above is 10 million. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct.
So it does break that out, and then prior it talks of the smaller systems. So it's available to all systems, but there is limits placed on it.
And there's also some exemptions that are mentioned in the bill, and some of those apply to the smaller, you know, class 5 and 6 counties, that they can apply for exemptions if the project is going to exceed 25% of their annual operating budget. They could apply for an exemption, or if their water quality is such that they cannot get a meter warranty in their area, they could apply for an exemption. Or if they have a groundwater management plan in effect since 2006, then they could apply for an exemption. Those are the 3 possible exemptions.
Well, and then it's a tiered deal, the way it appears to me, that 292 through 296, cost share goes down depending upon how quickly they do the projects.
Yep.
So,
And I think, yeah, the legislature's intent there was to try to get people to go for
Right.
this sooner than later.
yeah, the sooner you do it, the higher the cost share availability. If you drag your feet, you're gonna pay more out of your pocket. Okay.
Yeah, so that's my presentation, Mr. Chair and members of the board, and the action we would be seeking is, yeah, approval to put these rules through the rulemaking process.
Well, I know with other sidebar discussions that some of us have had, that because the official board meeting doesn't start until 3 o'clock, that there will be more discussion relative to this particular item in the board meeting as well. So do we have any other questions at this point? I had one when you said one of the exemptions is if they're not able to get a meter that is able to be, I forget the word you used, certified or
Warranty.
warranted. What's an example of a meter that wouldn't be able to be warranted?
It would more be the water quality in it. Maybe there's really poor quality water that's got just either a lot of sediment that a meter company would say, yeah, we're not going to warranty a meter with that water.
Okay.
And that they could then say, well, we can't get a company that'll warranty a meter with this water. We're not sure how many of those we'll see. There are, because the meters are getting pretty sophisticated. Some of the ultrasonic ones you look through it and it's an open pipe essentially. That water the meter shouldn't be restricting the flow of that water, but there could still be some issues if there's chemical, I don't know. We'll have to see what happens there, but I do know there are some systems that say they've had trouble getting a metering company to warranty a meter for them, so we'll see.
Okay. This is an item that will need a motion on it. I appreciate Blaine bringing that up and asking that question. You know, what's expected here is, do we have a board member that's willing to address that issue?
I'd be glad to, and if Joel, if you'll put something together as far as a specific motion that you need, I'd be happy to take care of this item, Kyle.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, Marty, you got off the hook. You didn't have to, unless you want to say something.
So you may have already figured this out, but I mean, we kind of got talking about two things. One, the bill, which is a statute, and board doesn't vote on that. We're not going to be able to change that. The rule is just a very small section of just helping to try to define what an educational component is that we have to make as a requirement. And it was kind of important for us to get right on that because it's something we have to have done before we have a contract. So the rule needs to be effective by then, which takes 45 to 60 days to get that effective rule. So anyway,
Time crunch.
looks like you all got that, so there was no reason for me to stand up to begin with, so I'll sit down.
Thank you for that clarification.
You know, Marty, we appreciate your input and appreciate that you attempt to keep us on the somewhat straight and narrow. As I used to tell a lawyer in my old position, it's okay if I bounce on the bars, but I don't want to go through. So just make sure we bounce in worst case scenario, but we don't travel through.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to further discussion on that then in the board meeting at 3. So thank you, Joel. Thank you, Marty. Move on to the next agenda item, and that is water conservation plans, review process, and compliance update. Shelby Erickson.
Yeah, Shelby will be here for the board meeting,
Okay.
but this is just information to the board to kind of go through our water conservation plan process and talk to you about some of the updates on the website as well.
Okay, then we'll look forward to that discussion. Next one is Lake Powell Pipeline Report. Eric, anything you want to give us at this point?
In the packets that were sent out, it has kind of the stuff we'll go through. I don't know if we really need to go over anything right now. We'll just kind of go through that item by item in the board meeting. So it's a lot of it's a repeat. So
Board members, or do you have any questions on what was in the packet and what will be discussed in the board meeting? Blaine, were you raising your hand or?
I just gave him a thumbs up. I look forward to hearing from him.
Okay. All right.
thank you.
Okay. Next item is the director's report. Candace.
Yeah, so pretty much for our director's report, I'm going to have Joel go through in just a minute when we get to information for the board. I'm going to highlight a few pieces of legislation. I know there's a lot, and I know you've already heard a lot, but I just want to make sure we cover some of the things that are relevant to this board that maybe you haven't heard in other areas, or that we have some work to do as far as making rules and those type of things. Well, I want to highlight some of the great work that's been done through our team with the secondary metering grants, talking about the application and the website has been created and developed. You guys already approved the application, but we already have a website up, so we can already start pointing people toward information. A flyer was developed We did have those at our booth, and we can get you a copy. We can send you a copy if you're interested. And then, we heard a lot about Colorado River today, but there were probably just cover a couple of highlights there as well. So just that'll be the general things I'll cover. Happy to answer any questions.
Do you want to introduce new employees now?
Yep, I was going to do that when we get to the information to the board. But you're okay. And we do have a new employee that I'm going to introduce when we get to that point. I think we're there though, because I think that was the last agenda item.
Except for adjournment.
Oh,
So we'll
that's-
do that before. No. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so David Gunther is our new GIS analyst. I have Aaron Austin. They're both online. Aaron Austin is his manager, and he's going to introduce him to the board. We're just pulling up. There we go. Oh, we can't hear Aaron very well.
Aaron, you're muted. Or we're not hearing you.
Just 1 second, Aaron. Mike's working on it.
We can see your mouth moving, but no words.
Juliet can hear him. Oh, and welcome, Juliet.
Oh, yes, thank you. Juliet, thank you for being here. Juliet's our other board member. I mentioned at the outset that she would be joining us in progress of this meeting being held. So thank you, Juliet.
Testing. You got people working on it?
Say, Aaron, I can still hear you.
Still nothing coming.
Not yet our end.
Technology is great when it works. Bear with us and we'll see if we can get this going.
So it sounds like they're going to have to work on it over the break, Aaron and Juliet and David. And we will schedule some time at the next board meeting to introduce you when we're in Salt Lake, if that's okay, David. Okay. Thanks so much, you guys, for your patience.
Thank you. We apologize for those technical difficulties and look forward to getting acquainted with David and his role with the division. So that was are there any other items to discuss then?
Yeah, I just had a couple
Okay.
more information to the board items. As many of you know, as we welcome new people, we are also saying goodbye to some people. Recently, since our last board meeting, we had 4 people resign. Matt Call, Bob Wenzel, Lindsay Russell, and Stephanie McGinnis. So they have moved on, and we will miss them, and we're grateful for the work they did. I got to give a big shout out to Matt Call. He's been with us for a lot of years, and really appreciate all the work he did managing the design and construction section. And then Joel, are you ready to give a legislative update?
Yes, I also wondered if the chair would like an update on status of funds.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for calling that to my attention, and yeah, we'll go ahead and take care of that and your legislative update.
Good, we'll go through the status of funds. The revolving construction fund has got, we had a beginning balance of about 14 million. With the projects that have been contracted, committed, and authorized, we've got anticipated remaining balance of 4.6 million, with the remembering that these funds also provide the dam safety grants, and so we are actually saving up for a couple of known dam safety projects that will be coming through. So we may not want to overuse those too much right now. Then the city water loan fund, beginning balance of 7.7 million, and we do have 4.3 million still available that's not contracted or committed, and so we can direct some additional projects out of city water loan fund. And I did provide each of the board members with a one-page summary of what each of those revolving funds are, just as a refresher. I know sometimes it's good to remember what's the difference between the C&D and the city water loan fund and the revolving fund. So that the city water loan fund, one attractive thing about it is it does have the ability to go to a 0% interest rate if we encountered a municipality that needed that. Maybe they're have some hardship, and we could direct a project to that fund knowing that they may be able to get a 0% interest rate, whereas normally a municipality would have to go from the C&D fund and it would have to have an interest rate. Having a hard time hearing? Sorry, I'll try to speak more directly into the microphone. The Conservation and Development Fund, page 3, has the largest balance, beginning balance, 98 million was what was listed as being available for this start of this year. As we look down through, if all the projects on the books go forward, and there's now some big ones with Provo Cities and the Provo River water users, that Deer Creek project, it shows that we would use all of those funds with the projects on here. And then the other thing to keep in mind is we do anticipate additional money coming into this fund with sales tax, and then also with the paying off the recapitalization that we've been doing for a number of years now. That final payment will be made this year. I believe June of this year we'll make our final payment on the recapitalization, where the board essentially pledged a chunk of their repayments to do that recapitalization project when they enclosed the Murdoch Canal. That'll be paid off this year, and now those funds will come back into the board revolving program, and then so that'll be good to have some additional money come in, and we'll update the board on amounts as we get a better idea of when and how much that may be. But it should have a significant impact on the balance there. I wanted to mention one other thing, the secondary metering money, the $250 million, 50 of it had already been appropriated and was already in the treasurer's account for you to use. The additional $200 million, that bill was signed by the governor yesterday, so it is in effect, and that money is now available as well. So $250 million that you have in an account. We will probably add a page to the status of funds and just to track that money separately. You know, it won't be in the C&D, it won't be in one of the existing revolving funds, so we'll just add a page to that and
Separate standalone.
track those funds. So that'll be another fund that you will get to kind of watch. Obviously, that all expires at the end of 2026. We have until December to put as much of that money to use as we can, and we'll be tracking that. So that's update on status of funds. Any questions about that before I move to legislation?
Board members, any questions on the status of funds?
The 200 million, is that July 1 fiscal year, or is it now he signed it right now?
It's available now.
It's now.
Yep.
And Joel, if I understand, that all has to go for meters, right?
Yes.
So does that mean the price of meters is going up?
Yeah.
Already have.
Yep.
I
You know how
bet
supply and demand works.
Well, I
huh?
do. That's why I ask. I mean, it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot because you've just advertised how many dollars are out there and it has to go for meters. So the competition for meters just went up and the price went up immensely.
Yep,
And the installation tripled.
probably. Well, I will move into going over a few of the bills that we wanted to highlight. As Candace mentioned, there was, you know, between 30 and 40 bills, water bills that we were paying attention to and following. And I've sent out to you some information, some summaries about these, and I'll just hit a few of them. House Bill 33, in-stream flow amendments. The changes there were intended to expand the use of in-stream flows so that they could be used to benefit systems. So one example was that may be a way to help the Great Salt Lake. If there could be an in-stream flow change to say, I'm going to let that water continue on to the lake. The change to that bill would allow that. I'll jump to House Bill 121, Water Conservation Amendments from Representative Spendlove. An interesting note there was about the government facilities. If it's a facility that is built or reconstructed after May 4th of this year, then they can only have they can have no more than 20% of the grounds be lawn. So that's will be an interesting requirement there to help reduce the amount of unused turf. Another requirement for state agencies, they must reduce their outdoor water use by 5% by at least 2023, and that would be using a benchmark of the water use in 2020. So they've got to reduce it by 5% by 2023 and by 25% by 2026. So that'll be a good effort to see the state agencies and their efforts to reduce their water use. That bill also provided the division with $5 million that we can use as incentives for owners, homeowners, or business owners. The definition just said an owner is a private residential, commercial, industrial, or institutional landowner that has a retail water service contract. So there's basically, if you own turf and you want to replace it for water-wise landscaping, then you can apply for a grant. We are going to need to do rules on this one to know how are we going to administer these grants. One other hiccup is that the money that came to us, we understood that this was going to be general fund, and then that the companion bill that I'll mention a little bit later, House Bill 429, Great Salt Lake amendments, there was $5 million in that bill that was we anticipated to be ARPA funds and to do a integrated water assessment for the Great Salt Lake. At some point, there was a switcheroo, and the $5 million that was general fund went to Great Salt Lake, and the $5 million in ARPA went to this bill, the House Bill 121 for conservation. And we are getting some mixed opinions on whether ARPA funds can be used for lawn replacement. And so they're digging into that, and we're going to get some information, some guidance, hopefully from the governor's office, to find out how we're going to be able to do that. So there are some questions about that $5 million and that potential incentive program and how we will do that, but the bill says we could replace up to 50% of the costs for someone to replace their landscaping, and that we would do so on a first-come, first-served basis with the application. So I know there's some people that are eager to know how we're going to do that because they would love to apply for that. So we'll be working on that one. And that, as I understand it, would not have to go through the board. Those ones would be handled more similar to the toilet rebates and other conservation grant incentives that just go through our office. So you hopefully would not have to entertain all of those landscape replacement type applications. I'll jump to House Bill 168, Preferences of Water Rights Amendments. That one was just interesting because it kind of tasks the state engineer to study how the state should address preferred uses of water. So if there's a temporary water shortage emergency declared by the governor, there's been questions as to, well, how do you know what those preferences, what is the priority? Where should the water go? That the state engineer has been tasked with analyzing that. And so just thought that might be interesting for everybody to be aware of, that is going on.
Well, and Joel, that one I think is going to be very controversial before this one gets sorted out. Because you're talking of turning water rights upside down, the possibility of it. So I think you're going to see this one as of great concern to a lot of the ag community.
Yep, and there was some interesting discussion at the Water Development Task Force on that very issue of if water is transferred, the people that water is being taken from would need to be compensated fairly. And so I think there'll be lots of things to consider there. Like you said, it will get a lot of discussion.
So I think you'll see quite a bit of involvement with water resources as this one sorts out, as well as with water rights. So
I'll briefly mention the two Utah Lake bills. House Bill 232, Utah Lake Authority. There was an entire presentation on that bill during this conference where they talked about what are some of the purposes of the authority, that it will replace the Utah Lake Commission. Then there's the House Bill 240, Utah Lake Amendments. That one lays out some requirements that if the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, who right now has the kind of oversees those sovereign lands, which are lake and river beds, that if they were to make a recommendation that those lands be disposed of, and I think we're all looking at the Islands project here, if they decided to give state lands up for a purpose like that, that it would need to meet certain requirements, and then also that it would need the approval of the legislature and the governor. So it added, I think many view some protections there of additional approvals needed before something like that could be done. And it would also need to be proven that it is legal to do so, because there are some concerns there. If lands can't even be given up for a purpose like that. House Bill 242, the secondary water metering. And so this one we've talked some about. I think there's a lot that we can talk about. The highlights that Candace mentioned are important, that website is up, so we can refer people to water.utah.gov. And there is a link right on that first page to the secondary metering grants. On that page, you can click a link to the application. And so people can get started as of today working on their application. The application period where we will receive them doesn't officially start until April 1st, but that's a week away. And as I mentioned, this bill has been signed by the governor, so it is law, and we can proceed with this. We will start receiving these grant applications. It'll be a 45-day period where when it closes, we will then review all of the applications and prioritize them and prepare a presentation for you as the board to then make a decision on those. And right now we are targeting the August board meeting to review these applications and make funding decisions on them. We are also entertaining the possibility of 2 additional application periods this year. Because money's on such a tight time frame, Candace and I sat down and said, well, what's the most possible application periods we could have this year? And we did find a way that we could get 2 more in this year. It'll all be based on how the funding goes if it all gets applied for in this first round, we won't need additional rounds, but we suspect that because of that cap, that they can only receive up to 5 million or up to 10 million, that may then limit how much goes out the door. There are some large systems where that cap will be an issue, and so we may entertain the possibility of suggesting to legislators, if there's a special session, that maybe those caps be removed. Those were intended to be there when we thought we only had $50 million, and we knew that money would go quick. But now that we know we have $250 million, we think maybe that cap could be lifted and let even the large systems apply for more than that to completely meter their systems. Another item in 242, there is a provision for meters that have already been installed within the last year, that they can still apply for the grant in addition to the additional meters that they plan to install. And then also we talked about the $2 million for meters that have already been installed where they don't intend to apply for additional grant. That we'll need to make rules for that. But there is a lot in that bill, including penalties from the state engineer if people don't meter by 2030. And we've had some concerns expressed about that. We've had one supplier already come to us and say, well, we're going to take our chances on that, and we don't intend to install any meters. And so we'll see. There'll be some mixed responses to how people react to this bill. We just do want to make sure that the word gets out to everybody that this funding is available. The applications are online, and the sooner they get them in, the better we can help them get this money contracted, and they can get the meters ordered and start looking for contractors.
Joel, another question that's come up relative to that particular issue, and that's on the penalty phases of it. The question has been posed, if a water company or secondary supplier has 10,000 meters and they've actively pursued and getting 5,000 installed, but they don't meet the deadline for the others, are they going to be imposed a fine on the full 10,000 or only on those that have not been metered yet? So that's a question that's come up, and the legislation doesn't appear to address that or differentiate between the two, so something to anticipate.
And I'm almost wanting to turn it over to Candace, because the bill does give her the authority to be the one that says who gets penalized. She gets to refer people to the state engineer. So Candace, what do you say on that?
I'll just say the Director of Water Resources in 2030 will have that opportunity. Not making any announcements or anything, but just to clarify. I think that's a really good question, and I would have to review it a little bit more in that light. I would anticipate that and really at that point, actually, it falls under the state engineer. It would be the director's job to notify the state engineer if someone wasn't fully metered. And so then the state engineer would go through that process. So that's a question I would probably want to confer with her on, of how she reads it. But that's a really good question. And I think a lot of this, I mean, we're still trying to unpack a lot of all of this and what it means and what was the intention and all those type of things. So, yeah, we'll definitely look into that. That's a great question.
And I'm going to look into Candace's calendar and make sure in December of 2029 it doesn't say retire or something. So. Any other questions about 242 for right now? There is a lot for us to do there, but the main thing is to know that it's official, that money's there, and we're going to work to be as quick and efficient as we can of getting the money to people so that they can put it to use. And I think Randy is right that there probably will be some increased expenses for both the meters and installation, but it's still 70% grant money that we can try to do as much as we can with. And so that's the attitude we're taking on it.
Joel, if I could, just given the time, we're at 2:45. We need a 10-minute break for, not a refreshment break, but a break.
Yes.
So if you can kind of
yes,
speed that
I
up.
appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you so much. You've got the rest of the summary. What I might encourage then is glance through, and if there's specific bills that you'd like maybe a little bit more inside information on. Candace and I were in a lot of these sessions where these bills were discussed, and we'd be happy to have some additional detailed talk, but I'll leave it at that for the legislative summary.
And just one
Okay, thank
quick
you.
thing to finish out the information to the board, just a reminder to complete the open and public meeting training. I believe Lindsay sent that out before she left. No, oh, it was Shalane, I'm sorry, thank you, Shalane. Shalane sent that out. So please, just a reminder to complete that training. Thank you.
I have completed it, it's fairly simple. So,
I sent mine in.
and I know Blaine has, the rest of those that haven't, accommodate that as quickly as you can. Thank you. Okay, with that then, we will adjourn. Do we have a motion to adjourn? So moved. So we'll adjourn this portion of the meeting, and we'll reconvene at a little bit before 3. So make your potty break and then come on back. Thank you.